Hello there, I didn't see you. Today I'll be taking you through a journey of the Romantic era, and it will be quite amazing. The Age of Romance started in the 18th century after three major revolutions: the French, the American, and the Industrial. The world was changing quickly, and the Romantic writers took romance literature as a stride of revolt against the old Age of Enlightenment. They took forms of imagination and creativity over the Age of Enlightenment's more logical and moralistic views. And that's what I call a checkmate. Today we'll explore the world of Keats, Shelley, Burns, and many other Romantic era authors. And now, let's delve into romance.
Oh, I didn't see you there! I have to tell you about William Wordsworth today. Now, William Wordsworth was one of the most prominent romantic poets of his era, but you wouldn't have known that looking at him! His intellectual initiative was imperative to launching the revolt against the Age of Enlightenment at the age of 28. Most famously, he wrote The Prelude, a poem that described his own poetic process that was inspired by the beautiful, chaotic nature of nature. Throughout his 80-year life, he traveled across Europe, searching for the inspiration of his poetry to be found in nature. His work was both a description of the poetic mind and an example of it. Born on April 7th, 1770, he arrived just in time to take advantage of this fad. And take advantage he did. His work led him to be appointed as Britain's Poet Laureate in 1843, a job that did not require him to write any poetry. He held the job until his death, and in that time did not write a single stanza.
Today I'm going to talk to you about William Blake. He was born on November 28, 1757, and he died in 1827. William Blake was well known for his poetry. Blake was not recognized or revered for his poetry until after his death. One of his most popular set of poems was called the Poems of Innocence. William Blake married a woman named Catherine Boucher. She was illiterate. He taught her how to read, write, and engrave. William Blake, at the age of 14, took an apprenticeship with James Bezier. He was employed for 7 years. He, afterwards, became a professional engraver. At the age of 4, William Blake saw God. At the age of 9, William Blake saw angels in trees. When his brother died, William Blake saw his spirit arise and start clapping.
So hey everybody, Keats here, and I'm going to be trying something new today. I'm going to be doing a Draw My Life. So, it all started in Moorgate, London, when I was born on October 31st, 1795. I lived with my family of 6, and being a family that size, money was pretty tight, which is why they ended up sending me to John Clark's School of Enfield, a much cheaper school when I was 7. Less than a year passed before my dad bit the dust during a riding accident, but despite the tragic event, I still managed to thrive in my schooling, while also befriending the headmaster who further encouraged my literary studies. Sadly though, my last year of schooling at Clark's, with me at the age of 14, was ended off with the death of my mother thanks to tuberculosis. The years which followed had me apprenticing a Mr. Thomas Hammond, eventually having me receive my apothecary's license in 1860. During this period though, I found myself becoming increasingly depressed and not having time to work on my passion, which was poetry. And though I did earn my license, I decided that a life of medicine was not for me, and instead pursued my career as a poet. Now finally having the time to work and study my passion, one form which I studied in depth was the sonnet, and through making connections with some particular individuals, namely Leigh Hunt, I was able to get one of my sonnets, O Solitude, published in the Examiner. Not much time had passed before once again I was aided by Hunt in getting a collection of my written letters and sonnets published in the aptly named Poems. Funny thing is, it ended up being a critical failure. So critical, in fact, that my original publishers, the Olliers, were genuinely ashamed of backing me, thus forcing me to find a new publisher. Luckily, not everyone had given up on my efforts, and enthusiastic Mr. John Taylor decided to publish my future works. Though the following years proved successful for me, my income was not enough to support my generous lending to both friends and family, along with the debts owed from medical school earlier on. And to add to this, my health had slowly been deteriorating, partly thanks to our damp living conditions in London. It's because of this, my brothers and I decided to move to Hampstead in 1817. It's here where I nursed my brother Tom, who was suffering of tuberculosis. And, despite my good intentions, it was through this where I as well became infected, finally leading to my death on February 23rd, 1821, at the age of 25. So thanks, Tom.
The beginning is always today. That's a quote by Mary Shelley, who you may know as the author of Frankenstein. Mary Shelley was born 1797 in London, England. Her father, William Godwin, never gave them a formal education at home. However, he did tutor them, I guess. He gave them an education in mostly literature. However, her father was deep in debt, so she was sent away to Scotland in 1812. However, by the time that she came back in 1814, she was hanging out regularly with another author, Percy Shelley. In 1814, Percy Shelley, Mary Godwin, and Mary Godwin's half-sister, Clara Claremont, went to Europe. However, they ran out of money fast, so they came back to England. That's where Mary Godwin gave birth to Percy Shelley's child. However, she died. A year later, they went to Lake Geneva to hang out with Lord Byron, another famous poet of their time. This is where Mary Shelley got the idea to write Frankenstein, when Lord Byron was like, hey guys, we should all tell ghost stories. Mary Shelley couldn't think of a ghost story, so instead, she thought of a revival of the dead story. Frankenstein was published 1818, and for our reasons, almost everything afterwards was an anticlimax in Mary Shelley's life. Mostly because that was her most famous work, published when she was like 21 or something. However, she did spend the rest of her life depressed because Percy Shelley was off with other women everywhere. All of her kids died except for one. Oh man. And then her husband died in a boating accident. So yeah, she didn't live the best life. She died of a brain tumor too, at the age of 53.
But to see her was to love her. Love but her, and love forever. Robert Burns, A Fond Kiss. Oh, I didn't see you there. Hello. I bet you're all thinking, who's Robert Burns? Well, I'm here to tell you about that. Robert Burns was the greatest poet of the Romantic era. He was widely known as the national poet of Scotland and a pioneer to the Romantic movement. He was a great inspiration to the founders of liberalism, socialism, and to famous poet William Wordsworth. Robert Burns had a very unique style of writing for his time. His work was known for its spontaneity, directness, and sincerity. He was schooled on English, biblical, and classical literature, and was skilled in writing in both English and the Scots language. Much of Burns' work still lives on in our culture today, including one of his most famous pieces, Auld Lang Syne, which is sung at the Hogmanay, which is the last day of the year in Scotland. A second poem of his, which is called Scots Way Hey, is an unofficial national anthem of Scotland.
Key elements used in Romantic era poetry. Individualism and religion were prominent in these works rather than the society that were in other poetic eras. Strong emotions played a huge role in shaping of this poetry. There is a reverence of nature, folklore, nationalism, and medievalism, and that brings us back to nature being a huge part of this poetic. The Romantic era brought back little-known facts or things in society that happened, and
was pastoral poetry, also known as country life. Melancholy was a word used best to describe the Romantic era. Rules of traditional poetry and artistic expression started to loosen up quite a bit during this era. This era was not quite as strict with their poetic expression. They loosened up their rules and allowed for a large amount of freedom within writing. The subject and content of most poems dictated these changes. Rhyme stanzas were starting to fade, while blank verse started to become acceptable. These changes were seen throughout many of the poems. This was the age that you begin to see works that have a story or a background to them. This was where the fantasy characters and ideas came into play. These works allowed you to dream, to romanticize your lives. I bet our viewers are just dying to know about this age's remarkable social factors.
Yeah, just think about how tough things were in the Romantic era.
Yeah, right after the Industrial Revolution and everything. I'm pretty sure that people were kind of upset about living in all those cities.
Yeah, cities are not cool.
I don't like them either. And neither did they.
Rampant consumerism.
I think it's interesting how
Yeah.
people revolted against the Age of Enlightenment through the Romantic era.
Oh yes, like the rise of individualism in both literature and personal life.
And the introduction of spontaneity and eccentricity as admirable traits.
Eccentricity? What?
As a revered personality trait.
It's really no wonder why these youth revolted against the Enlightenment age of their parents.
Things sure turned around drastically.
Oh, did they ever?
Logical reasoning took a backseat to emotional impulses.
The heart overpowered the mind for the entire era.
People lived life to the fullest, giving no regard to the real world.
This was the time of dreamers.
The passion of these artists was
Amazing.
Hello again, and thank you for joining us on an adventure through the Romantic era. I'll be sure to see you again.